enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. And I want to echo the thanks that Eileen mentioned at the last of the hour to you and the board for pivoting and making this conference available to us virtually. I know so many of us would have missed getting together with our tribe. I'd also, as just the education chair who's just retired, I'd love to give a shout out to the more than 40 volunteers who worked to review the proposals that came in for this conference to help put together just a really great slate of opportunities for all of us to attend and to learn. So I look forward to this every year. And for those of you attending, welcome. It's a little bit of a challenge from a presenter point of view. I need to rely very heavily on Bill and Stephanie and others to let me know what's going on your side, but I encourage you to lean in and participate as much as we can with the technology. I'll do my very best to honor your requests. And so let's move into the presentation. And it's really about performance improvement and change management. And it's my work to respond really to two questions. One is something I was really curious about, which is how do these two disciplines fit together? I know a lot of you come from, say, instructional design or learning and look at performance technology improvement and have that particular lens as well. But how does change management fit into performance improvement? And then how do we leverage change management practices and principles in order to increase our effectiveness as performance improvement professionals? And so that's the inquiry around which this particular presentation was built. So for those of you who do not know me, I'm a longtime ISPIer. Again, I would be delighted to talk to anyone about the CPT. I've been a CPT since 2002. And I was wondering whether or not it was right for me and wondering whether or not it would be an advantage to have a CPT. And I remember Judy Hale telling me that train has left the station. And I thought, well, I better get on that train. And so I did. But anyway, I've been in the field a long time and doing work in an area really where performance improvement, curriculum design, and change management come together. I work on a lot of initiatives where we're bringing something completely new to an organization. And so it's not just a matter of filling a training gap, but we really need to change performance. I'm also a college professor, and change management is one of the courses that I teach along with instructional design leadership and a couple other things. My goal today is to have a dialogue. So use the technologies as much as you can to help that happen. And don't forget that there's a handout for you that I hope summarizes some of the main takeaways that I thought you would be interested in. So just to be clear about where we are, those of you who are students of performance improvement or have been around ISPI for a while will recognize this model. It's not important that you look at it and digest any of the information, but this is just a model that captures a lot of the different activities that we use as we go about improving performance in organizations. And just like a mall map, I wanted to show you, you are here. So if you look at this version of the model, and there are other versions that are out there, but in this version, the whole model, all of the activities that we engage in are arrayed within the element of change management, which is represented by that large box outside of the model. Now, what's really interesting, sometimes when I see somebody referring to this model as a source and including it as a graphic in their work, sometimes they leave out that whole change management box almost as if it were just a graphic element. But I think we've acknowledged from the beginning, from the time that our field was codified, that change management is a part and parcel of what we do. So I'm not suggesting that what I'm talking about here is anything new, but rather that what we're doing is really looking at performance improvement. I'm asking you to step back and look at it through specifically a change management lens, because I think that will help us focus on some things that are, I think, pretty interesting. So change management is the discipline that guides really how we prepare, equip, support individuals to adapt to change to reach and drive organizational success and outcomes. This is not an uncommon definition, but there are a couple elements I'd want to camp on for just a second. One is that when you look at the change management literature and when you talk to people who work on change management, their focus is often at the individual level. And a lot of times we're off in our performance improvement work looking at the aggregate. But change management is also driving organizational success and outcomes. So that's where those the organizational success and outcomes, those goals really intersect. And it's really about systematically addressing the human side. And my argument would be that the change management approach should be fully integrated into the program design and the decision making based on kind of a realistic assessment of an organization's history, readiness, and capacity of the people, the individuals in the organization to change. So if we could, let's pull up the first poll. All right, so if you would, please find the polling button and answer this question. To what extent do you intentionally manage change in your work? To what extent do you manage change? Now, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I definitely would have said I always think about change management. Now, in my practice today, I'm much more intentional. I'm not seeing results yet, Bill, so when you're ready, you can let me know.
Absolutely. So we're going to run it for 1 minute here. There's
Okay.
about 50% of our audience has voted. So we'll go ahead and take another 10 seconds or so. If you haven't had a chance to vote, please open up your polling tab or not polling tab, but you should see a quick poll up on the screen, and please select one of the following. All right, we're over 50%, we're at 54. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and let you know that we had, here's your breakdown. So we had ranking from highest percentage to lowest, 45% to a great extent, 40% to a moderate extent, and 15% to some extent.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that information because it lets me know that at least many of us are really thinking about change management as we go about our work. And so I'm going to invite you as we go through this discussion to add your best practices to some of the ones that I've distilled to share so that we can add our knowledge together and all of us walk away from this hour richer than when we came in. So oh, there we go. Now the results are showing.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. Thank you so much. We're all learning new things, aren't we? Life is good. Okay, so about 5 years ago, I really started thinking about change in different ways. I was working with an organization who was facing an important organizational change. And if you are familiar with tech companies, as companies are moving to the cloud, it causes changes in how people work from almost every single role in the company. So I was working with a group who was trying to facilitate the performance improvement. In other words, our focus was on getting some organizational changes in place. And we were understanding, looking through the lens, say, of the behavioral engineering model or binder six boxes model, something like that, to understand what people needed in order to influence their performance and how we were going to work as a crew to get that to them. One of the roles that wasn't really changing the way they were working, and we knew this because we were getting all kinds of reports, including the lack of organizational impact, but these were the implementation consultants, and they facilitated the work where the changes in the software were being introduced to the customer and also implemented at the customer site. And so we took a look at it, and the customers weren't going through the process. The consultants were continuing to preference old tactics and old practices. And we started, talking to them to see what the problems were. And they said, well, the customers really don't want this change. We need to be customer focused. That's our real value add. And so what we were finding is really that all of the performance improvement boxes were checked in some very significant ways, but we were seeing a lot of resistance to this change because we really didn't manage it in a way that made a difference to them, that really compelled them. The failure of the company didn't do it, the loss of a job didn't do it. My gosh, how much of a burning platform do you need to get people to jump on board? And so I thought, I really need to learn more about this. And one of the things that I took to heart is the idea that organizations don't really change, that people do. And this quotation that I'm sharing with you is from a book by John Cotter and Dan Cohen. I have it here in my home office here in Dublin, Ohio. And it's called The Heart of Change. And one of the things that this book emphasizes and illustrates over and over is that people change not because of what's going on in their head, but what's going on in their heart. And this might seem to be a small change, but many of us are analysts. This is my tribe. You guys are my tribe. We like our data. We always start with analysis. And I'm very persuaded when I see things that are analytical. But when we're talking about change, large scale, small scale change, it's appealing to people's hearts. That is where we need to put a great deal of our effort. And so this was a significant finding for me, a significant way of rethinking the work that I do, how I communicate, what I communicate, when I communicate it, in order to support performance improvement. So that brings us to the second poll. And for this one, I've given you some options, but if you don't like any of the options, you can type something in the chat window. And the question is really, why does change fail? And so I see the poll is in progress. And so you're welcome. I'll give you a minute to share with me your experience about why change fails in the world that you work in. Why does change fail in your organization? The elements that I've chosen to put in there happen to be what research tells us are the most likely reasons that change fails in organizations, but there can be others.
All right, so we have greater than 50%. We'll go about another 10 seconds. Please make your selection and I'll close and launch the results.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bill.
My pleasure.
Takes a village. Takes a village. Okay.
There you go.
So we see that resistance is number one here, and sponsors not visibly supportive. All right, so some communications, managers not empowered. Training got 0 selected. So as we go through and talk about this, I will kind of organize our time around the experiences that you have. Was there anything typed in the chat window that I should be aware of?
We're looking now. Looks like a couple of
you.
folks did not have an opportunity they didn't have an opportunity to vote. No, that's it.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So let's go on. This kind of is my premise. You know, we're used to thinking about groups and the behavior of groups, but when we're planning to help people change, the individual differences become more important. And I really loved the photo that I was able to put on the slide because if you look at the different colors of the balls and you think of each of the balls here as individuals, everybody that we encounter, everybody that we work with is at a different place in going through the change. Um, I will tell you, as someone who's been a consultant for a long time, it's way more fun to figure out what changes we need to impose on people than it is to have changes imposed on us. And so it's very helpful for me to think about the fact that, again, we're looking at individual and individual differences in terms of how they feel, how much time it's going to take, and all those kinds of things to go through the change. So again, I wouldn't feel good without putting a change model up here, and there are a lot of great models. I did some work with Bill Bridges. I like his model. There's all kinds of classic models, but Levine's is a traditional one, and it's very simple but powerful. He talks about change in three stages. You know, we're frozen, then there's unfreezing, and then we refreeze again in the new way that we're going to think about, whatever the change is about. And it's interesting to look at that model. And when I used to think of it, I thought of everybody kind of starting at one place, and then together we'd go through the unfreezing, and then together we would refreeze. But over time, I've learned that, that people go through those stages at very, very different rates. And that's something that we need to think about and accommodate. So as I looked at the change literature, I looked at my practice and the practice of other people, I pulled out some considerations for change I wanted to share with you, and they are in these various categories. So that brings us to the poll, which is which of those areas of change are the most challenging for you? Now, we've talked about where you've seen changes fail, and we know resistance and sponsorship are top of the list. But if Bill could put that third poll up for us, I'd like to know which area is the most challenging for you to manage in your practice. And again, that will help us shade how much time we spend of the time that's remaining that we have together on the discussion. So take a moment. Again, I thank you very much for participating. I know how tempting it is when you have work and family at home. Some of you, your pets need to go in and out. It's so tempting to multitask and maybe not be there to participate, but it really makes a difference to all of us if you're able to do that.
All right, we'll go another 10 seconds. We got just over 50%, 54, 56. It's building up. Get your answers in.
You guys are awesome. Just awesome. Okay, so we're talking about the areas that are most challenging. Those are the areas that are similar to where changes fail. Managing resistance is our top one, and I have to say that that would be my pick for the category. Sponsorship, and then some other pieces as well. So thank you. And what I want to do is talk about each of these areas just a little bit and invite you to share your best practices by, I'll prompt you when it's time, typing them in the chat window so we can expand from the things that I think are important to some other things that you think are important. I'm going to go through these stepwise because that's how they're designed for the presentation, but we'll spend a little bit more time on the areas that are that you picked out as reasons that change fail in the areas that are most challenging for you. Okay, so gathering data is one of the first things. That wasn't an area that I asked you to choose, but I really think that in performance improvement, as in most solutions, creating of solutions, whether it's instructional design or interior design or anything like that, the better we understand what's going on, the better we can figure out the best way to approach a solution. So gathering data is something I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about. And many of these practices are things that you probably already do as good performance improvement practitioners and good change managers. But I just want to maybe refresh our practice. Maybe you'll walk away with a new idea or something else to think about in a project you're working on now.
Dawn, this is Bill. Are you looking for some chat answers? I think you're on mute.
There, finally, I've been able to unmute. Thank you. Been clicking that unmute button. So anyway, gathering data, there's some very important things that we need to keep in mind. One is making sure that we're gathering data from impacted groups and subgroups, and not only data about the performance improvement, but information about their views and feelings and concerns on the solution. One of the things that's important to note is you're going to have to go back after the solution set has been determined and do a little bit of data gathering about people's views, feelings, and concerns, because we certainly don't ask them to weigh in on potential solution sets usually up front. And as you normally would do, looking at informal and formal networks, I met somebody this year, one of my best meets, one of those networking things. It's just a wonderful thing to happen. A woman named, her last name is Luttrell, and she runs the Super User Network. And basically, she does systems implementations. And one of the things that's a secret sauce for her success is leveraging that informal network, making it formal, bringing it forward, and using the power of it. So making sure you're using both the informal and formal structure as you're gathering data. And then also kind of unique to change management that may be different from the typical things we ask in a performance improvement type of question or a questionnaire or a data gathering study, is making sure that we're looking at the history of change in the organization as well as the readiness and capacity of folks to change. Because I don't know about you guys, but the nature and rate of change are accelerating, and so we really need to see if there really is capacity for what we want to accomplish in the groups of people that we're going to be impacting. And then finally, one of the best suggestions, and this would be the best to show for the data gathering, is a recommendation that I have to involve stakeholders throughout the data gathering and solution creation process in order to foster ownership. And one of the reasons that I bring this out, and many of you, this is part and parcel of your practice. One of the reasons I bring this out and underline it is I have seen over the past 3 to 5 years a growing trend. I'm encountering it more and more, and just encountered it in a project this week, that people want to do performance improvement projects by gathering data from the leaders, getting the leaders involved in creating solution sets, and then moving forward. That leaves all the other groups of stakeholders who have very interesting and compelling information about performance. It leaves them completely by the wayside, and it also puts us in a position where we're completely blind to how those changes impact those groups. So in terms of gathering data, I want to ask you to type into the chat window, is there a best practice that you think should be included on this list? Again, for change managers for performance improvement people looking through a change management lens, what is a great thing to keep in mind when you're gathering data? I'll give you a minute to type in there, and then I'll ask Bill or Stephanie to see if they can share with us some of the things that might be in that chat window.
All right, DeAndre has chimed in with focus groups on the presented intervention.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorites. I'm so glad you brought that up, because once you've decided on those interventions, if you can get some of those people to come to the table to tell you how that's going to impact them, what their concerns are, and what their feelings are, that's a perfect way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Burns says involve those who do the work daily.
Absolutely.
And Al Crane dialogue process that involves all stakeholders. Decision dialogue is the one that he uses.
I love that. Thank you, Al.
And Timothy Hunt, sensitivity on how the change may affect the person you are interviewing. Ronald Graves, polling the hourly workers. Stephen Ellis, give participants a sense of control. And from Al Crane, two more. Al Crane consists of designers and decision makers. And Joseph Cameron chimes in with look for past efforts.
Oh, absolutely. Those are all absolutely wonderful. And I'm so glad you brought those forward. So, as we gather data, a lot of your success is really, it's not rocket science. It's, are you asking the right questions of the right people at the right time? And my suggestion would be is that we make sure that we're looking at some point in our data gathering through the lens of um, change management to see individuals, their thoughts and concerns, and making sure we've got some representation there. Excellent. So planning communications is not an area where people showed that there was a lot of concern. So I'll go through this relatively quickly. One of the key things that I find in communications are just making sure that we're not doing a one size fits all type of communication. And it's very easy when I look at plans that other people have created, that there's one plan. In November we send out, we put it in the company newsletter, the change is coming, and we have these different types of communication vehicles, and they march through in a lockstep so that everyone gets the same messaging at the same time. And I would argue that, first of all, we really need to think about our subgroups and make sure they're getting the right message at the right time for them, because not all organizational improvements are going to roll out at the same pace and at the same time and hit the same people. And then the other thing is, preventing resistance by making sure we're sharing important information about the change. Why now? What's the risk of not changing? I think there are two other kinds of best practices that wouldn't go into list form. But one is, if you look at Cotter's argument that you really need to look at the heart of the change, the hearts of the people, then giving them the charts and the graphs that might be compelling to analysts may not be enough. So one of the things I've seen organizations have a lot of success with is coming forward with communications that tug more at the heart. So instead of, here are some graphs about the different audiences that are impacted by the change. Instead of that, there's a short video that showcases representatives of different stakeholding audiences and how they can be impacted by the change and the benefits that it would have to them. And it becomes more like a Super Bowl commercial, right, than a research report. And that's all to the good. There was one other point I wanted to make, and I think I've just lost it. But anyway, making sure that we're not doing the one size fits all, and that we're tugging at people's hearts, and that we do have a communication plan in place. Very, very important. I'm not going to camp on that one, but we want to spend a little bit more time on this one, which is leveraging sponsors. Now, one of the things that Eileen and Doug said in the last hour when they were talking about some of the challenges about getting people to the table is that your sponsors can change. It's very important to have this sponsorship, a visible element of sponsorship, and it's often why, change efforts and performance improvement efforts do fail. These are some of the key elements about a sponsor to help with change management. One is that, of course, they actively and visibly participate. And of course, we would think, gosh, why wouldn't a sponsor participate fully in a change? But the truth is, a lot of times these sponsors are pulled in so many different directions. And so it's important to know going into that change what type of support you're going to get in terms of them being able to put their social capital on the line and support the things that you're doing. You're also going to need that person and be able to coach them in building a coalition of support. So making sure that they've got all the right leaders at the table. If there's a strong IT component for the change, for example, they might need some of the IT leaders there to make sure that the IT components of the changes proceed at a pace with the rest of the project and don't get knocked off track because of a different organizational initiative. The same is true of other silos or functional lines of business. So it's very important to make sure that the sponsor does that kind of work. And then we also want to encourage our sponsors, whoever they are, to communicate directly with the employees, especially those that are impacted by the change. And they should be able to share and be very knowledgeable about, the business reasons for the change and the nature of the change. Acknowledging the leader or sponsor should acknowledge that they understand that it's going to have an impact on people's lives. So these are, best practices, again, from literature. I know one of my challenges when I worked internally was making sure the sponsor came to the table with all of this, because it was so tempting for sponsors to assign it to, my team and expect us to be able to manage the visibility, the coalition building, and all of the communications. So because this is an area of concern and where we've seen a lot of failure, I would invite you to type into the chat window and let me know what are some of the best practices that you employ when you're looking at your performance improvement efforts through a change management lens in terms of leveraging the support of your sponsors. Give you a minute to go ahead and do that. Type your comments right in. I know you've got a lot to say, a lot of good stuff.
Okay, so from Nancy, understand their needs and goals.
Absolutely.
Tim says align change goals with organizational goals.
Absolutely. Yes.
Eric Stavney definitely would want to write in the expectations of the sponsor in the project planning documents, call it out very specifically, and the time expected.
Wonderful. Those are great suggestions. And a lot of them have to do with, putting those expectations in writing up front is always very helpful, because you don't want to go to the sponsor and say, hey, next week I need you to make a little video that we're gonna play at this event. And then also that alignment to organizational goals. One of the things that I think is really very interesting, and maybe you guys have seen this as well, as organizations go through, again, this more change, faster pace of change. I've seen companies or organizations have a list of initiatives that's actually quite long, and they're mutually exclusive. You can't accomplish everything, and the sponsor can't possibly be the face for all of those important high priority organizational changes. So hopefully you work for an organization that's able to do a good job of setting priorities, as well as a sponsor who's willing to come forward and support the work that you do. Some of that is good politics too, and I know there are a lot of you out there that are way better at that than I am. So one of the things that actually there wasn't a lot of interest in the discussion, but I think this is one of the most powerful things that you can do, and something that I largely see ignored in performance improvement projects. And that is supporting the direct managers. So supporting the managers of the people who change. So when I've told you before in this presentation that one of the lines of sight that I now have is thinking about all these people in terms of individuals, well, how on earth do we manage individuals who are at all these different rates of change? I know I managed a team of people, and there was one person on the team who I will call Eeyore. Those of you who are Winnie the Pooh fans know who Eeyore is. Because whatever we needed to do that was any kind of change, Eeyore would always say, oh, we can't do it. We've done it before, it didn't work. And so this was the person who always lagged behind everyone else. Well, the key for you in helping get a hold of all those individuals and helping them through that change process are the managers of the people. So the better you equip these managers with a coaching plan that enables them to do their manager work, the more effective your performance improvement change can be. And my argument would be that the coaching plan should help them deliver the key messages about the change. So it should have, you might give them a little document with talking points. You might give them a little bit of training on this. But helping them with the key messages, helping them, give them some budget or some tools to provide recognition and reinforcement for people who are good examples of those who are going through the change, so that it doesn't become the flavor of the month. People look at these early adopters or people who are having successes and notice that the company is saying, yes, applause, you're doing the right thing. Okay, that's our incentive work, but it's very important if you let managers have a role in that, they can help those individuals again through the change, because we can't possibly manage that huge variety of differences in where individuals are in terms of their hearts. And then the other thing is, and resistance is an important topic to all of us, right? So is making sure that we encourage the management of resistance, that we encourage managers to overcome the resistance. Now, if you've got managers who are talking your change down, it's a real problem. But if you can encourage them to and empower them to help overcome the resistance of their employees, to make sure that they are rewarding the correct behaviors and not the old behaviors, that can go a long way towards helping with the resistance. So this is a subcategory of resistance, and I think I would encourage you to give that a look and see if it could help in your projects make a difference in that category. So providing training is something, again, there wasn't a lot of energy around this as an issue, but there are a couple things I would like to camp out on in terms of providing training that I think often get overlooked with the change management aspect. Okay.
All right.
Sorry,
Sorry about that.
yeah,
Don't know what.
the system keeps muting me and doesn't allow me to unmute. So I don't know if it's, I hope that's not a quality control thing.
I hope
It's
not.
like,
My apologies.
no, 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 I don't mean you. I mean, it's kind of like the shepherd's crook coming in to take the speaker off the stage. Anyway, so don't we love technology? We'll get through this. So for providing training, I'll just go quickly through these main points. One is that you want to, again, avoid the one size fits all training where everybody who has different performance needs in regards to the change gets the same training, because that can be a problem. Another thing that I think is an overlooked opportunity is that we can train our managers and we can train others on change management. We can train individual contributors to be better at resilience and managing their own change, and we can change others to help people through the changes. So one of the things, for example, in the story I told you about the implementation consultants, we anticipated results from customers, but one of the things that we failed to do was train them and empower them to overcome that kind of resistance on the part of the customers. And so instead, they put on their customer focus hats and said, hey, the customers don't like it. So to be, customer focused, I have to report that back to you. When in truth, in order for everybody to survive, we all had to move to the cloud, and that's the way the organization was going to go. The other thing, again, and I know a lot of you are experts in learning, so you can probably speak to this as every bit as well as I can, but we need to account for unlearning and relearning. One of the things that I think is a very contemporary example is that many of us have moved home for the first time. I have a huge advantage. I've been working virtually for virtually my whole career. So for years and years and years, and I've always had the technology support to do that. But as a lot of people have moved home, they've learned that you have to unlearn some of the habits that you take for granted in a workplace where we deal regularly with others face to face, and we have to relearn new things. So it's not just, hey, here's the new world, here's how you organize that, but we have to unlearn some old things as well as relearn new. So it's sometimes the lift is harder on training than we expect it to be. And it also takes more time if you have to unlearn and relearn. So does anyone have anything they would like to weigh in about providing training? Go ahead and type any of your comments into the chat box. So I'll give Bill, when he's ready, he can take a look and see if there's anything showing up there that we can discuss.
Yep, keeping my eyes open, waiting for some comments.
Okay. We'll give it just another few seconds, and if nobody has anything they want to say here, we'll move on. And that's just fine.
Oh, I guess let's just move on.
Perfect. All right, so what I think we've all kind of got an appetite to discuss is managing resistance. And again, I think one of the challenges we have when we look at managing resistance, at least I've become much more successful at it when I start to follow some of these guidelines here. And I think in terms of heart rather than head, and that individuals go at their own pace based on their own specific concerns. So one of the first things that I'd want to bring forward is that, resistance is natural and expected. I said before in the presentation, and I was really not joking, is that it's really much more fun to be the one who's saying, this is the change we should initiate, than it is to be the one who is told these are the changes that you need to implement for our organization. And, we often, again, sell change as it's going to benefit you. And we say that we ought to find those benefits for you. But there are some roles for a very broad organizational change. There are some roles that are distinctly disadvantaged. Their job may be harder. Their job may not be as appealing to them. Their job may be different than what they prefer. And so that makes a big difference. So resistance is natural and unexpected. And the key here is to plan to manage it. And again, you've got an army of different ways to manage it, from the things that didn't get mentioned, like the communication plan and coaching the direct managers to manage that resistance, along with the focus groups that Anthony suggested early on, that you can do the focus groups and maybe figure out people's specific concerns and put some solutions in place to help people ramp up and move through the change faster. It's also good if you can anticipate those objections and then the root causes of the objections. So I'm working with a group right now who is actually at a university. It's a curriculum change that needs to happen, and it needs to happen in order for this curriculum to continue to be offered. And one of the things that keeps getting in the way is that, first of all, people don't necessarily want to make the changes because it might mean fewer hours for them to teach. I'm working with the faculty. It might mean that some of the courses that they really value don't look the same anymore. And folks are just frankly worried about losing their jobs. And so it's hard to get through the work that we need to get through because these concerns kind of keep popping up. You also want to reserve some bandwidth, I think, to address issues that arise that you did not expect. So, we talked before in data gathering, you want to make sure you're gathering these perspectives, you want to plan for the resistance. But, there are always things, we're not psychic, maybe some of us are a little bit, but there are going to be issues that arise during implementation that we did not anticipate. So not only do we want to address them, but we want to have an ear to the ground so that we're still collecting that information and getting feedback and feed forward from these different groups so that we understand how the change is working for them. And then when those issues do arise, we can address them relatively quickly before they grow out of proportion to the nature of the type of problem that they are. And then, like the change management box around our whole model, we want to be able to integrate resistance management throughout our whole solution set. Because again, every phase of a project, every time somebody's job changes, there are opportunities to resist. And sometimes people go to the new way, decide they don't like it, and then move back to abandoning it. So these are some elements about resistance that I personally pay attention to when I'm going through some of the work that I do. And so because this was something of interest, and we're almost at the last slide of these, I'm going to ask, could we be unmuted and have just a brief discussion about managing resistance?
Hold 1 second.
Thank you. We're really exercising our staff and our moderators today. Thank you guys so much for being so flexible. Okay, it sounds like we may be unmuted. Does anyone have a suggestion about managing resistance?
Dawn, this is Judy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Judy. Thank you.
I think one of the things that I've learned about managing resistance is to honor it and not make people feel that the resistance is bad, but really to it is a legitimate feeling. It's harder to let go. So I think we have to. I just found that anyone.
All right, so
I'll find the
all right, so I'm going to ask you to mute your own line if you've got All right.
Okay,
So,
go ahead, Beck.
all right. So thank you. So Judy brings up a really great point, and that is to even though we're calling it resistance, it's really kind of an honorable and natural, and it's an okay response to change. So by honoring the resistance, by letting people know that it's okay to have those feelings, it's an okay, because each change we may gain something, we may not. We are typically giving up something. It's an important way to think about and honor the individuals that we're participating with. So I think I'm going to keep moving forward here. I wanted to say just a few words about evaluating change efforts because we always evaluate our performance improvement work, but there are some things you might want to consider adding to the things that you check in on if you're going to focus specifically on change management. And here's a list of them. And depending on the things, again, that are of interest to you, these are some things that I might suggest. Okay. We really wouldn't have a complete discussion about change management if we didn't talk about change fatigue. And I've said a couple times in this presentation that there's just a lot going on with change in organizations. And so people get tired, and how you see change fatigue, it's kind of this general sense of apathy or this resignation towards organizational changes. You can see it in individuals, you can see it in teams, and it's not caused by the change itself, but it's because it's caused by so many different changes going on all at once. You know, a lot of times we're initiating a very important change, and we've talked about that in terms of the sponsor, but the sponsor is also supporting another group in initiating a very important change. So there is research that shows that 70% of transformation efforts fail, and a big result of that is change fatigue. So you want to keep an eye out to what you can do that is realistic. You know, Eileen and Doug were talking about when you go into a situation, talking about what is possible if an organization is just okay. So in summary, and I got this from Diane Dormant, one of my mentors, and she has a book called The Chocolate Model of Change. It's a very accessible book about change management. It's awesome. But you can use force. You can force your change through the organization. Or number two, you can just cause pain and kind of, you know, not worry about that as you go through. Or the third thing that you can do as you're doing your performance improvement work and managing change is to facilitate the acceptance, which is really taking that line of sight into making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to be successful. So if you would just type into the chat.
Dawn,
Yes.
I'm sorry, you've got somebody that is stating that it's debilitating when you work hard to implement a change and then it changes. You work hard again and it changes again. And
Oh,
then
absolutely. So thank you for making that point, because it is that whole element of change fatigue. It's difficult not only for the people that we work with, but for us. It's still a bit debilitating for us to be told, hey, go over here and make this happen, run over here and make this happen. So it is kind of in the nature of organizations, and it's up to the leaders in organizations to manage that a little bit, and it's up to us to give them some good advice about how it's impacting. So I've got
and then we have one, oops, I'm sorry. We have one more person who stated, Joseph Cameron said, I have found that if you can address the issues of a resistor, they can be turned and be a strong supporter.
Oh, Joseph, that is such a great, great comment, because that's absolutely true. But the key in that, as Joseph has implied, is that you have to address that change. left unchecked, that resistor will go on to encourage others to resist as well. So in the interest of time, I'm very interested in your takeaways. I would love to continue the conversation. Here are some of the resources that I referenced and talked about in the context of this presentation. And then I encourage you to stay in touch with me, and I would love to continue the conversation and hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for spending this time.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Let's go ahead and we're going to be changing over to our next set of presenters. So if you'll bear with us for a little while, we'll be back on at in about 3 minutes for our next session. And I also would like to say, Dawn, thank you so much for your role in making this conference possible. I know there was a lot of work behind the scenes, and we very much appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. It was a team. It's all a team effort.
All
It's
right.
an honor to participate.
Thank you.